The smart lock on Meira's condo door had been acting up for weeks. She'd mentioned it twice, maybe 3 times, in that particular tone she used when she expected me to fix things without being asked directly. So, there I was, Thursday night at 11:30, half a bottle of whiskey warming my gut, rewiring the electronic components with my toolkit spread across her pristine marble floor. I'm Soren Valden, and I fix things for a living. Network infrastructure, mostly. Corporate systems that break down when executives push buttons they shouldn't push. It's honest work, even if the people who sign my paychecks aren't always honest themselves. The lock mechanism clicked as I reconnected the final wire. Perfect timing, because I could hear Meira's voice approaching from the other side of the door, along with another voice I recognized. Lukas Sorrell, her boss at Meridian Financial. The man who'd been taking up an awful lot of space in her conversations lately. He'll propose at the gala next Friday, Meira was saying, her voice carrying that crisp, calculated tone she used in boardroom presentations. I'll let him get down on one knee in front of everyone, then humiliate him on stage. Make it look like emotional instability. HR will have grounds to terminate him for workplace disruption. My screwdriver froze halfway to my toolkit. The hallway suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. You're certain he suspects nothing? Lukas asked. His voice had that smooth, practiced quality of a man who'd spent years convincing people to trust him with their money. Soren? Meira laughed, and the sound cut through me like broken glass. He's too busy with his little computer projects to notice anything beyond his next beer. He thinks I work late because I'm dedicated. Poor thing actually believes I married him for love. I should have stood up. Should have confronted them right there. Instead, I stayed crouched behind the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The transfer went through, Lukas continued. $2 million. Clean as morning coffee. Soren's name is on the authorization papers. When this all comes out, he'll take the fall for the offshore accounts while we disappear to somewhere warm and expensive. The lock clicked as they entered the condo. I gathered my tools in silence, muscle memory taking over while my brain tried to process what I'd just heard. My wife of 3 years had been planning my professional execution with military precision. She'd been stealing money, forging my signature, and setting me up to take the blame. I slipped out through the emergency stairwell, my toolkit clanking softly with each step. The October air hit my face like a slap, but it felt good, real. Everything else felt like I was watching someone else's nightmare. Back in my own apartment across town, I poured another whiskey and stared at the half-unpacked boxes that had been sitting there since the separation 6 months ago. Meira had suggested we take some space to work on ourselves. I'd thought she meant couples therapy and weekend getaways. Apparently she'd meant embezzlement and frame jobs. I always said she was a planner. Should have checked who she was planning against. The next morning, I showed up at Meridian Financial like nothing had changed. The office building rose 43 stories into the Seattle sky, all glass and steel and corporate ambition. I badged in through the employee entrance, nodded to security, and took the elevator to the 37th floor where the IT department lived. Meira worked on 41, executive territory. I'd been up there exactly twice in the 3 years since she'd gotten me this job. Both times, I'd felt like a janitor who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. "Morning, Soren," called Janet from the reception desk. "How's the separation going?" "About as well as a root canal," I replied, settling into my cubicle, but with more paperwork. The morning passed in a blur of network diagnostics and server maintenance. Routine stuff that let my mind wander to more pressing concerns, like how to prove my wife was a criminal without landing in prison myself. Around noon, I decided to test a theory. I pulled up the financial authorization system and checked the access logs for my user account. Sure enough, there were entries I didn't recognize. Someone had been using my credentials to approve transfers I'd never seen. The timestamps matched perfectly with Meira's late nights at the office. She'd been busy. Very busy. I copied the logs to a secure drive and buried it in my desk drawer. Evidence was good, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of what she'd been doing, and more importantly, I needed to figure out how to turn it against her. The gym was my sanctuary, neon lights, heavy bags, and the honest smell of sweat and determination. I'd been going to Murphy's Boxing 3 nights a week for the past year, ever since Meira had started working late more often than she came home. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," said Danny Murphy, the owner and my unofficial therapist. He was an ex-cop who'd opened the gym after taking early retirement, the kind of man who could read trouble from across the room. "Worse," I said, wrapping my hands. "Someone stole my life." I told him everything while I worked the heavy bag. The overheard conversation, the forged authorizations, the setup. Danny listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. "You want revenge, Valden?" he said when I finished. "Go for the head. Humiliation hurts more than any punch you could throw." "What do you mean?" "Public exposure. Make it so she can't show her face in polite society. Corporate types care more about their reputation than their money. Take away her credibility, and you take away everything she's worked for." He was right. Meira lived for the respect of her peers, the admiration of her subordinates, the fear of her competitors. Strip that away, and she'd have nothing left but her crimes and her conscience, assuming she had one. I spent the weekend building my case. Meira was at another corporate retreat, which I now understood meant she was probably in some expensive hotel room with Lukas, planning my downfall in between room service and champagne. Her laptop was still in the condo. She'd taken her work computer but left her personal machine, probably figuring I was too stupid to know the difference. I'd helped her set up the home network, so I knew all her passwords. She'd never been good with technology. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. What I found made my stomach turn. Months of planning, laid out in spreadsheets and email drafts, not just the embezzlement, but a complete character assassination campaign. Fake psychological evaluations suggesting I was unstable, fabricated complaints from coworkers about my behavior, even a draft resignation letter in my name, confessing to the financial crimes and apologizing for my mental health issues. She'd thought of everything. Almost everything. The charity gala was scheduled for the following Friday at the Paramount Theater, Meridian Financial's annual fundraiser for local nonprofits, where the company's executives could display their generosity while writing off expensive entertainment as business expenses. Meira had been planning it for months, and according to her notes, she expected me to propose to her on stage during the evening's program. I had different plans. Monday morning brought rain and the kind of gray Seattle sky that matched my mood perfectly. I arrived at the office early, before the executive assistants and middle managers started their daily parade of self-importance. The building felt different now that I knew what was happening in the floors above me, like walking through a house where someone had recently committed a crime. I needed an ally, and I thought I knew where to find one. Aven Bardell worked as Meira's executive assistant, a position that sounded prestigious but mostly involved managing Meira's calendar and absorbing her bad moods. I'd met her a few times during company events, and she'd always struck me as someone who saw more than she let on, the kind of person who kept her mouth shut and her eyes open. I found her in the break room on the 39th floor, making coffee with the focused intensity of someone who needed caffeine to face the day ahead. "Aven," I said, trying to sound casual, "how's life in the executive suite?" She looked up, surprised. "Soren, right? Meira's husband. What brings you up here? Slumming with management?" "Something like that." I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't want. "How's she treating you these days?" "Like a piece of office equipment that occasionally needs maintenance." Aven's smile was sharp around the edges. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about her work habits. She's been putting in long hours lately." "Oh, she's been very dedicated. Lots of private meetings with Mr. Sorrell, very focused on upcoming projects." There was something in her tone that suggested she knew exactly what kind of projects Meira was focused on. "Upcoming projects?" Aven studied me for a moment, like she was deciding whether to trust me with something important. "Let's just say your wife has been very interested in financial planning lately, and not the kind that helps the company." She knew. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in the careful way she chose her words. Aven Bardell knew exactly what Meira and Lukas were doing, and she wasn't happy about it. "If someone hypothetically wanted to know more about these financial planning sessions," I said, "how would they go about getting that information?" "Hypothetically?" Aven glanced around the break room to make sure we were alone. "They might want to check the conference room on 41, the one with the broken security camera. Meira thinks it's private, but the audio pickup still works. Hypothetically speaking." She handed me a small device that looked like a USB drive. "That's got the building's maintenance access codes, in case someone needed to check on that broken camera. For maintenance purposes, of course." I pocketed the drive. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've been keeping records of everything I've been asked to do for the past 6 months. Forged signatures, backdated documents, mysterious financial transfers. I figured eventually someone would want to see them." Her smile turned predatory. "I just didn't think it would be the husband." That afternoon, I made my way to the 41st floor using the maintenance access codes. The executive level was all polished marble and expensive art, the kind of environment designed to intimidate visitors and stroke executive egos. I found the conference room Aven had mentioned and confirmed that the security camera was indeed non-functional. The audio pickup, however, was working perfectly. I planted a small recording device behind the conference table and synced it to my phone. If Meira and Lukas were planning to use this room for their private meetings, I wanted to hear every word. I didn't have to wait long. Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an incoming audio file. I put in earbuds and listened to my wife's voice discussing the finer points of financial fraud. The final transfer needs to happen Friday morning, she was saying, right before the gala. That way, when Soren makes his little scene on stage, security will already have grounds to detain him. The missing money will be discovered over the weekend, and by Monday morning, he'll be the obvious suspect. You're certain the authorization codes will hold up to scrutiny? Lukas asked. I've been using his credentials for months. The digital trail is perfect. Even if he claims someone else used his access, who's going to believe him? A disgruntled employee with a history of mental instability versus a respected executive with 15 years of clean service. And the assistant? Aven? She'll keep her mouth shut if she knows what's good for her. I've got enough dirt on her expense reports to keep her quiet for years. I pulled out the earbuds and stared at my phone screen. They were planning to frame me Friday morning, then use my public proposal as evidence of my unstable mental state. By the time the weekend was over, I'd be facing criminal charges while they disappeared with $2 million of company money, unless I got to them first. Wednesday evening, I followed Lukas to a parking garage downtown. He drove a silver BMW that probably cost more than I made in 2 years, the kind of car that announced its owner's importance to anyone within a 50-foot radius. I waited until he was inside the building, then approached his vehicle with a spring-loaded center punch I'd borrowed from the shop. The driver's side window spider-webbed beautifully. I reached through the broken glass and left a note on his dashboard. Hope this scratch isn't as deep as your secrets. A concerned citizen. Then I walked away, hands in my pockets, just another pedestrian in the evening crowd. But as I reached the street, I spotted a familiar figure watching from the shadows near the garage entrance. Aven Bardell, looking directly at me with an unreadable expression. She'd seen everything. The question was what she planned to do about it. Thursday morning brought news that Lukas Sorrell had filed a police report about vandalism to his vehicle. According to the company Grapevine, he was convinced it was related to a disgruntled client, but security was reviewing garage footage just to be safe. I spent the day acting normal, fixing network problems, and pretending I didn't know my professional life was scheduled to end in 24 hours. Around lunchtime, I got a text from an unknown number. Meet me in the south stairwell, floor 35, come alone. Aven was waiting for me, holding a manila envelope that looked thick enough to contain serious documentation. That was stupid, she said without preamble. Breaking his window. I don't know what you're talking about. The garage has cameras, Soren. Not great ones, but good enough to identify you if someone looks hard enough. Which they will, once everything else comes to light. She handed me the envelope. This contains copies of everything I've been forced to help them with over the past 6 months. Forged authorizations, falsified reports, email communications between Meira and Lukas discussing the transfers. Everything. I opened the envelope and scanned the contents. It was damning, more than damning. It was enough to send both of them to federal prison for a very long time. Why? I asked. Because they are planning to throw me under the bus too. I found the draft termination letter Meira wrote for me. Apparently I'm going to be fired for gross negligence in allowing unauthorized access to executive accounts. My career will be over, and I'll be lucky if I don't face criminal charges myself. So this is self-preservation. This is justice. They've been using people like chess pieces, moving us around to serve their purposes. Time someone moved them for a change. She was right. Meira and Lukas had been playing a game where they made all the rules and everyone else was expendable. But games could be won by changing the rules, and I was starting to understand how to do exactly that. The gala is tomorrow night, I said. I know. Meira's expecting you to propose during the dinner program. She's got a whole speech prepared about how honored she is, but how she needs time to think about it. Very public, very humiliating. What if we gave her a different kind of spectacle? Aven's smile was sharp as broken glass. What did you have in mind? Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth and clear skies, as if the weather was mocking my mood. I spent the morning at work, going through the motions of network maintenance while my mind focused on the evening ahead. According to my monitoring equipment, Meira and Lukas had executed their final financial transfer at 9:15 a.m., moving the last of the embezzled funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. They thought they were home free. In 8 hours, they'd learn otherwise. The Paramount Theater had been transformed for Meridian Financial's annual charity gala. Red carpets, ice sculptures, and enough flowers to stock a funeral home. The company's elite mingled in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, sipping champagne and discussing quarterly projections like they were matters of national importance. I arrived fashionably late, wearing the one good suit I owned and carrying a small leather portfolio that contained printouts of everything Aven had given me. The plan was simple: expose Meira and Lukas publicly, in front of everyone who mattered in their professional world, then let the legal system handle the rest. Meira looked stunning in a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was holding court near the silent auction tables, surrounded by junior executives who hung on her every word like she was dispensing wisdom from on high. When she saw me, her smile was perfect and completely artificial. "Soren, darling," she said, approaching with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent years perfecting her public persona. "I was wondering when you'd arrive. You clean up nicely." "Thanks. You look beautiful." It wasn't a lie. Meira had always been stunning, which had made it easy to overlook her other qualities, or lack thereof. "The program starts in 20 minutes, she continued, adjusting my tie with proprietary familiarity. "I hope you're not planning anything embarrassing." "Who? Me? I'm just here for the free champagne and overpriced art." She laughed, the sound carrying just the right note of affectionate exasperation. "Try to behave yourself. There are important people here tonight." "I'll do my best." I excused myself and made my way to the theater's audio-visual control booth, where a bored-looking technician was managing the evening's sound and lighting. The booth overlooked the main floor, providing a perfect view of the stage where Meira expected to humiliate me in front of 300 of Seattle's business elite. "Excuse me," I said to the technician. "I'm Soren Valden, IT support for Meridian. We've got a presentation update that needs to be loaded into the system." The technician, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, barely looked up from his console. "Yeah, sure. Just plug it into the auxiliary port." I connected the USB drive Aven had prepared, which contained audio recordings of Meira and Lukas discussing their embezzlement scheme, along with digital copies of all the forged documents. The files were set to autoplay during what was supposed to be my proposal moment. "Thanks," I told the technician. "This should make for an interesting evening." The dinner program began at 8 o'clock sharp. Meridian's CEO gave a speech about corporate responsibility and giving back to the community. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a butter knife. Various executives took turns at the podium, discussing the company's charitable initiatives while carefully avoiding mention of where the money for those initiatives actually came from. Finally, it was time for the evening's special presentation. Meira took the stage, looking radiant under the spotlights, and began speaking about the importance of personal relationships in professional success. The speech was clearly designed to set up my proposal, creating the perfect moment for maximum humiliation. "Tonight," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the theater's sound system, "I'd like to invite someone very special to join me on stage. My husband, Soren Valden." The audience applauded politely as I made my way to the stage. Meira's smile was triumphant, like a cat that had cornered a particularly slow mouse. She was expecting me to drop to one knee, to make myself vulnerable in front of everyone who mattered in our professional world. Instead, I walked to the podium and pulled out my portfolio. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I have something very important to share with you, something about trust, betrayal, and the true cost of ambition." Meira's expression shifted from triumph to confusion to growing alarm as I began reading from the documents in my portfolio: bank account numbers, transfer dates, authorization codes. The audience grew restless as the technical details mounted, but I could see understanding dawning on the faces of the financial executives in the crowd. "These are records of unauthorized transfers totaling $2 million in company funds," I continued. "Transfers made using forged authorization codes and falsified documentation, transfers made by people you trust to manage your money and your careers." I nodded to the AV booth, and suddenly Meira's voice filled the theater, crystal clear through the sound system. "The final transfer needs to happen Friday morning, right before the gala. That way, when Soren makes his little scene on stage, security will already have grounds to detain him." The audience erupted. Conversations exploded across the theater floor as people recognized the voices and understood what they were hearing. Meira stood frozen at my side, her face pale under the stage lights. "You see," I said into the microphone, "my wife was planning to humiliate me tonight, to make me look unstable and untrustworthy in front of all of you. What she didn't plan on was me returning the favor." Lukas Sorrell was trying to slip out through a side exit, but several board members had already moved to block his path. Security was converging on the stage, but they seemed confused about who they were supposed to be detaining. "The evidence is all here," I continued, holding up the portfolio. "Financial records, audio recordings, email communications, Everything you need to understand how two of your most trusted executives have been stealing from you for months. Meira finally found her voice. This is fabricated, she said, grabbing the microphone. Soren is mentally unstable. He's been obsessing over conspiracy theories, making up stories to explain his own professional failures. This is just more proof that he needs psychiatric help. But her words fell flat. The audience had heard her own voice on the recordings, discussing the embezzlement in detail. They'd seen the financial documents with her digital signature. The evidence was overwhelming, and everyone in that theater knew it. Actually, said a voice from the audience, there's more. Aven Bardell stepped forward, holding a thick manila folder. I've been documenting everything for the past 6 months. Every forged signature, every falsified document, every illegal transfer. Ms. Valden and Mr. Sorrell have been using me to help cover their tracks, threatening my career if I didn't cooperate. She handed the folder to the CEO, who began flipping through the contents with growing anger. This is enough evidence to support criminal charges, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the theater's acoustics. Security, please detain Ms. Valden and Mr. Sorrell until the authorities arrive. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of police interviews and corporate damage control. Meira and Lukas were arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The media picked up the story within hours, turning Meridian Financial's charity gala into a cautionary tale about corporate corruption. I spent Saturday morning in the HR department, providing a detailed statement about my wife's crimes and my role in exposing them. The company's lawyers assured me that I wouldn't face any charges, since the evidence clearly showed I'd been set up as a fall guy. What happens now? I asked the HR director. Now we rebuild, she said. The board is conducting a full audit of all executive accounts. We're implementing new oversight procedures to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, and we're very grateful for your courage in bringing this to our attention. Courage had nothing to do with it. I was just trying to avoid prison. Either way, you did the right thing. The company won't forget that. By Monday morning, the story had made national news. Meridian Financial's stock price had taken a hit, but the board's quick response and full cooperation with law enforcement had prevented a complete collapse. Meira and Lukas were facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison. I returned to work to find a new assignment waiting on my desk. Head of IT security, with a significant salary increase and expanded responsibilities. Apparently, exposing corporate fraud was considered a valuable skill set. Aven Bardell had been promoted to Assistant Director of Compliance, tasked with implementing the new oversight procedures that would prevent future embezzlement schemes. We'd become unlikely allies in the aftermath of our shared revenge, bonded by the experience of taking down two people who'd thought they were untouchable. 3 weeks after the gala, I received a call from Meira's lawyer requesting a meeting. She was being held at the Federal Detention Center, awaiting trial on multiple felony charges. Her bail had been denied due to flight risk concerns, particularly given the offshore accounts and her demonstrated willingness to frame others for her crimes. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to let her rot in federal custody while I moved on with my life. But curiosity won out, and I found myself sitting across from my wife in a sterile visiting room, separated by reinforced glass and speaking through a telephone handset. She looked smaller than I remembered. Prison orange didn't suit her, and the absence of makeup and professional styling had stripped away the polished facade she'd spent years perfecting. For the first time since I'd known her, Meira Valden looked like what she actually was, a criminal facing the consequences of her choices. "You destroyed my life," she said without preamble. "No," I replied. "I just stopped you from destroying mine. I gave you everything. A job, a home, a place in a world you never could have accessed on your own. You were nobody before you met me." "You're right. I was nobody, but I was honest nobody. You turned me into somebody by making me complicit in your crimes, whether I knew it or not." She leaned forward, pressing her palm against the glass. "We could have had everything, Soren. The money, the respect, the power. All you had to do was trust me." "Trust you to frame me for embezzlement? Trust you to destroy my reputation and send me to prison? That's an interesting definition of trust. I would have found a way to clear your name eventually, once we were safely out of the country. You would have let me take the fall for as long as it served your purposes, maybe forever if it kept you safe." Her composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what it's like to work twice as hard as every man in that building just to get half the recognition, to smile and nod while mediocre executives get promotions you deserved. I did what I had to do to level the playing field. You stole $2 million and tried to frame your husband for it. That's not leveling the playing field, that's being a criminal. And what you did to me? What was that?" "Justice." The word hung between us like a blade. Meira stared at me through the glass, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret flicker across her face. But it passed quickly, replaced by the cold calculation that had defined our marriage. "The prosecutors want me to testify against Lukas," she said. "Reduce my sentence in exchange for cooperation." "Are you going to do it?" "He's already thrown me under the bus, claiming the whole thing was my idea, that he was just following my lead. His lawyers are painting him as the victim of a manipulative woman who seduced him into criminal behavior." "Sounds familiar." "You think this is funny?" "I think it's poetic. You spent months planning to betray me, and now your partner is betraying you. There's a certain symmetry to it." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up again, her eyes were harder than I'd ever seen them. "I'll testify," she said. "I'll tell them everything. Every detail of how we planned it, how we executed it, how we were going to frame you. Lukas Sorrell is going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. And you? 15 to 20 years if I'm lucky, less if my testimony helps convict him on the more serious charges. I'm sorry it came to this." "No, you're not. You're exactly where you wanted to be. The hero who exposed the corruption, the honest man who stood up to the criminals. You'll probably get a promotion out of this." She was right. I wasn't sorry. Meira had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I felt no guilt about exposing her crimes, no regret about destroying her carefully constructed life. She'd been prepared to do the same to me without a moment's hesitation. Goodbye, Meira. This isn't over, Soren. I still have friends, connections, people who owe me favors. Your friends are corporate executives who care more about their reputations than their loyalties. Your connections are with people who won't return your calls now that you're a convicted felon. And the people who owe you favors are probably hoping you don't remember their names. I hung up the phone and walked away, leaving her sitting alone in the visiting room. It was the last time I ever saw my wife. The trial made national headlines. Corporate fraud cases usually generated limited public interest, but the dramatic exposure at the charity gala had captured media attention. The story had everything: betrayal, revenge, public humiliation, and a satisfying conclusion where the criminals faced justice. Meira's testimony against Lukas was devastating. She provided detailed accounts of their planning sessions, copies of their communications, and insider knowledge of how they'd manipulated company systems to cover their tracks. In exchange for her cooperation, she received a reduced sentence of 12 years in federal prison. Lukas Sorrell was sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. The judge cited his attempts to frame both me and Aven as evidence of his willingness to destroy innocent lives to protect himself. He would likely spend the rest of his productive years behind bars. 6 months after the gala, I was promoted again, this time to Director of Information Security for the entire Meridian Financial Network. My salary had tripled, and I'd moved from a cramped apartment to a downtown condo with a view of Elliott Bay. The company's board had made it clear that my actions had saved them from a much larger scandal, and they were prepared to reward that loyalty generously. Aven and I had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. We occasionally met for drinks after work, comparing notes on corporate politics and discussing the ongoing reforms at Meridian. She'd proven to be as sharp and capable as I'd suspected, and her new role in compliance suited her perfectly. "Any regrets?" she asked one evening as we sat on the terrace of a downtown restaurant, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "About Meira? No. She made her choice when she decided to steal that money and frame me for it. I just made sure she faced the consequences." "What about the marriage?" "The marriage was over the moment she started planning my destruction. I just didn't know it yet." "Do you think you'll try again? Marriage, I mean." "Someday, maybe, when I meet someone who doesn't see me as a convenient fall guy for their criminal enterprises." Aven laughed. "That's a pretty low bar. You'd be surprised how many people can't clear it." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the city come alive with evening lights. The Paramount Theater was visible in the distance, its marquee advertising a Broadway touring production. I thought about that night 3 months ago, when I'd stood on that stage and exposed the truth about my wife's crimes. It felt like a lifetime ago. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your promotion. You deserve everything you've worked for. A friend." I showed the message to Aven, who smiled and raised her wine glass. "To justice," she said. "To justice," I agreed, touching my glass to hers. The city spread out below us, full of possibilities and second chances. Somewhere in a federal prison, Meira was beginning her 12-year sentence. probably still convinced that she was the victim of my betrayal rather than the architect of her own destruction. Lukas was in an even worse situation, facing decades behind bars for crimes he'd thought would make him rich and powerful. They'd called me unstable, manipulative, untrustworthy. They'd planned to destroy my life to protect their own secrets. But in the end, I'd proven something they'd never understood. Sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who brings you down. The spectacle was over. The curtain had fallen. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged.